So Justine and her team are going to give us a quick presentation, and then we will open it up for questions. So you have the option of either raising your hand, either literally or with there's the raise hand function in reactions in Zoom, or feel free to type them in the chat box as well. And at least they're captured there if we don't have time to get to all of them. So thank you very much, Justine and team. I will hand over to you. We've got quite a few of you, so I might just give you the opportunity to all introduce yourselves and explain your roles to the participants.
Fantastic, thank you. So I'll kick off. I'm Justine, so Manager of Operations for the RAA. So my team helps establish the programs and gets the application forms and guidelines up and running, as well as looking after the payments. So after an application's approved, our team works through reviewing the invoices and processing the payments for the loans and grants. So we'll just go around the room here and then we can jump into the presentation.
I'm Erin Jarrick. As Justine mentioned, there's the payment section, so I'm the Program Officer of that.
I'm Subsidy Gordon, so I am the Program Officer for the applications and eligibility.
Morning everyone, I'm Karina Morris and I'm the Program Officer for the Supply Chain Support Grant.
Excellent. So, look, we'll jump into it. We're just going to do a quick presentation this morning about the assistance available and also just run through, I guess, some frequently asked questions that we get. They might be some questions that are on your mind as well, and then we'll kick it open. We've left a majority of the session open for Q&A so that you have time to ask any questions that are top of mind for you. So we'll kick it off here. Look, I know this one is a very busy slide, but essentially this is the storms and flood assistance that is currently live and available. So on the left-hand side, we have the February and March 21 event, so the event from 12 months ago. The Special Disaster Grant, so the $75,000 primary producer grant for that flood event is closed to applications. However, invoices can still be submitted through till the 1st of June. There is the potential for an extension in terms of close dates for that. However, we haven't got any firm details about that, but we will let you know as soon as we hear anything about any potential extensions. We've got the supply chain support grants, which are at various levels depending on the individual industries. That is open to applications through till the 30th of June. And then we had the initial rural landholders grant, which was for $10,000. Applications have closed for that one, but we're still accepting invoices through till the 1st of June 2022. There's been a couple of other events since that time. So there was a declaration in November and January. That was for a $50,000 primary producer support grant. And applications are still open for both of those programs. And then the current event is the February 2022 floods and storms. So for that, we've got the $75,000 special disaster grant. So applications are open for that, as well as a rural landholders grant. So if you aren't eligible and don't meet the 50% rules for the special disaster grant, you may be eligible for the rural landholders grant. And this time around, that grant's actually been increased to $25,000 given the severity of the event. So that's a high-level overview of the assistance that we have available. There's also the natural disaster transport subsidy, donated fodder subsidy, and the $130,000 natural disaster loan. But given we get the most questions on these grants, we've sort of focused on this available assistance. So I think now we might just move into some of the specific questions that we get around the programs. Oh, sorry, one thing, just out of interest, this is a map that's been done up by Resilience New South Wales to show the declared LGAs. So there has actually been 5 extensions from the February 22 flooding events. So obviously starting on the north coast and then migrating towards the south coast. So essentially the whole of that coastline has now been declared as part of this event. So I might hand over to Felicity, who's going to run through some of the questions that she gets around the $75,000 primary producer grant.
So I suppose the biggest thing we see as far as applications coming in are incomplete. So they're missing information. The biggest thing is financials. If you've applied under a partnership, we obviously need the tax return and the financial statements for the applying entity, as well as any individuals involved. Things like lease agreements are incomplete. If we don't just need the first page, we need the entire lease agreement. Missing financials for any involved entities as well, tax returns and financial statements. Things like rates notices and local land service rates notices not being provided as part of the application. All these things, I suppose, hold up the process and the time it takes to get the applications approved, just because the assessment officer is going back to the applicants and saying, can you please provide this? Can you please provide this? So to some degree, the longer it takes you to get back to them, then, the longer it takes you to, be approved for the program. Just little things like, the addresses on the application not matching the rates notice that's been provided. So we need to see, a lot of people actually put in their mailing address instead of the address that the damage actually occurred. So once again, if there's a difference in that, the assessment officers will have to clarify why there's a difference, and that's speaking to the applicant directly. All these little things hold up how quickly we can get your application approved. Things like the estimated damage amount versus the amount requested. If you're estimating your damages to be $55,000, but then you're requesting $75,000, once again, the assessment officers are going to have to call you and ask you questions around that. Why are you asking for $75,000 if your damages, you've deemed them to be $55,000? And it can be quite a simple thing, like, when you put in the application, you thought it was that amount, but then you've come across additional damages. And then we're seeing, particularly in the 2022s, as far as the explain the damages that have occurred. A lot of people are writing damages same as before, damages same as the first flood, things like that. We need to be I suppose people are assuming that we just need to be, specific within that application form, even if it is the same as before. We can't just have that written in the application form. So, if you get a missed call from an assessment officer or an email, the quicker you get onto it, the quicker we can, have it assessed and approved and, get you on your way.
And I think on that, the more information we have, the easier it is for us to understand what's been the main impact of this event. So we know a lot of producers have been impacted multiple times, and for us it's just trying to get that really clear picture so that we can help you return the business to normal as soon as possible, but we do need certain information to help us do that as quickly as possible. So the more that can be provided up front, hopefully we can move you through the process a lot quicker. So we'll just go through these slides, but feel free to put your hand up or jump in if you have any questions along the way as well.
So jumping to supply chain support grants. So this is the program that is on the back of the March 2021 floods. So the applicant does actually have to be approved for the full $75,000 to apply for supply chain. So applications are all online for this program. Applications close at 30th of June this year, and works are to be completed on the 30th of May 2023. So we don't actually need invoices straight away for this program. You do have some time to be able to submit those throughout that time frame. The main question we get asked for supply chain, because it is obviously different to other programs, is the co-contribution and how the milestone payments are done. So I guess a little step-by-step is once a supply chain application is approved and the applicant has fully dispersed their SDA, they will receive a call from our payments team, and they'll have a conversation regarding the funding deed. And what that funding deed outlines is activities that will be taken place within what will be used for those funds. So if it's fence repairs or earthworks, those conversations will be had. Also too, it'll be mentioned what the amounts of the milestones will be. So obviously with the dairy, they're eligible for $100,000. So that will be broken up into 4 $25,000 payments. So all of that is outlined in the funding deed. We will then post or send that out to the applicant. Once that's fully signed and returned, we will then release the first milestone payment. So the applicants will receive, for example, $25,000 in that first payment. We don't need evidence or invoices for that first payment. That's just to the applicant. To receive additional funding, the applicant will need to provide evidence of the first amount in invoices. So that $25,000 has to be, or eligible invoices need to be supplied as evidence for that money had been spent. And also too, that co-contribution is an amount that the applicant is putting towards the program. So for example, they get $25,000 straight away. They'll need to provide invoices for $25,000, and they'll need to also provide $25,000 of their own contribution, which can either be made up of multiple options. So they've got direct cash, in-kind invoices, and in-kind labour. So once we've totaled 25 in invoices and 25,000 in co-contribution, that's then when we can release the second lot of funding. And that process will go throughout, I guess, the milestone payments. So yeah, that's kind of a bit of info about supply chain. And I do believe there was a link to a fact sheet that was sent out in a newsletter last week as well. So I'm not sure if you've had a chance to look at the newsletter that was sent out for dairy, but there is a link in there to a fact sheet for supply chain that kind of breaks down those steps as well.
And I think one of the important things to call out is you don't have to have spent the full $75,000 to apply for the supply chain support grant. We really encourage early applications for that, so that we can assess and approve you for it. It's just we won't be able to start any payments until that first $75,000 from the special disaster assistance has been spent.
Can I just ask a question here?
Absolutely.
Well, these PowerPoint presentations which explain everything and a little bit more you spoke about, will they be available to us so we can elaborate to our members?
No, absolutely, we can provide that. A lot of this information is also on the website. There's some one-page guides and additional information that we can also send through some links to.
Okay,
and
basically
Linnell,
on the website, but yeah.
Linnell, the session is also being recorded, which we can provide you with a link to the recording afterwards as well.
Oh, that would be good, thank you. Because I'm in the dairy industry and we have multiple members affected from different flooding areas, zones, regions.
Yes. Sure.
Thank you.
How close to the end of the presentation are you, Justine? Or?
Best to last, Sheena, come on.
Okay, Andrew, is your question relevant to this section?
Yeah, it is relevant to this,
Sure.
to the supply chain grant.
Yep.
I've got a couple as I've been travelling around, Justine, so please bear with me. A bit of feedback. Some of the milestone dates may appear to be earlier than the documents received. So how stringent are the deadline dates? Because everyone's having trouble getting people, and a lot of those milestones are similar, so they're sort of ongoing works. So that's probably my first question there.
So to supply chain grants, so all funds have to be, or work has to be completed by the 30th of May 2023. In terms of individual milestone dates, there's definitely flexibility there. Applicants just really have to explain why work has been delayed or brought forward. And we're aware a lot of those delays are either due to weather or lack of being able to get contractors. So really just about communicating with us to say, look, this is roughly when we think it'll now be booked in for. And our milestones might be closer together because a large portion of the work, might be $75,000 worth of work, which means we may be able to move 2 milestones together. So really about just communicating with us about the recovery plan and the timeframes.
Excellent. Now, say someone comes across some work during the process, so they've got a contractor out and they find other things that need doing. After they've signed the deed arrangements, how hard is it to change those milestone requirements if they find there's new work that they need to do and it's not on the original milestone agreements?
Yeah, so in that situation, like Justine mentioned, it's best to have those conversations. Give us a call and let us know, what potentially is included. We would obviously, it would still have to fit within those eligible activities though. We can't go obviously out of those guidelines. So if it is in relation to earthworks and they've kind of stated that it was a road, but there's, there was a bit more damage sustained, would have to have, it would be a case by case and have to have a look at that information. But it's best to have the conversation with us first before they're obviously locking in contractors to do those works. It's best to call beforehand.
Yep, sure. Now, other in kind, a lot of farmers have a bit of a gravel pit. Now, it might not provide all their gravel needs, but it may actually provide base load gravel, and then they get proper gravel across the laneways. I'm particularly talking, again, in the dairy industry. That and, say, fuel for works. The application, when you punch that in for in-kind, really has in-kind invoices, cash, and also hours. So it doesn't allow for some people to put in that they have gravel and fuel. They've just basically got to tally the hours up for in-kind. So is that okay when they submit their worksheet that has those other items that are going in and being contributed from the farmer themselves?
Yeah, so as long as that in-kind worksheet, we've got a bit of an example too, like a template with an example of how it's to be set out. So as long as we've got the date and the time spent and those activities that were actually done for that time. Also, if they do have diesel purchases and things like that, that can be an in-kind invoice. If it is a paid invoice, and we do have then a document or a bit of a logbook as to say what that diesel purchase was used for, if it was for an equipment or some machinery for the cleanup, that invoice with a proof of payment can be used as an in-kind invoice towards their co-contribution.
The only thing is the gravel itself as a material wouldn't be covered as in-kind, but if they've spent hours, moving gravel and getting it around the property, then they can claim their in-kind hours associated with that.
Okay, so that's probably a bit of a concern because, some of that could be $10 to $30 a cubic metre, which they're supplying from their own resources. Bit surprised on that one being not able to be an in-kind contribution, but yeah. Materials, resilience and the poor quality material versus more appropriate material. We've got a lot of people who are looking, we've probably had three floods in some cases, or 3 declarations, and they could get washed out in any one of those 3 or all 3, and people are looking at probably wanting to do a bit of concreting to make their business more resilient. How's that treated?
So in that situation, we would need to have evidence that it hasn't been. So under the SDA grant, they haven't then repaired, laneways or anything previously. So there has to be no repair done to that damaged infrastructure. And then under supply chain, we would need to have evidence and quotes. But they can change, I guess, if it was gravel, they can change that to bitumen if it is going to be future resilient, but there is, you know, we need to have those conversations with the applicant, and we may require photos and quotes just to put all that information together.
So there has been a change. So, and it's sort of hard with multiple events, but for the November, January and current February event, there is a clause in the guidelines for the primary producer grants that future resilience can be part of the build back, and also in the supply chain support grant. So we're working through a one-page document at the moment to provide some real guidance around what future resilience entails, and mainly it's around improvement of materials to build back better, make it more resistant to natural disasters. So, you know, maybe the old wooden post sheds replaced with, you know, a steel corrugated shed. Maybe it's floors that were dirt or gravel are replaced with concrete. Some roads and bridge work, we know there's been talk about concrete or bitumen being used as a more resilient material. There's also moving potential objects to higher ground, so above the flood line or the previous flood lines, you know, improving feed pads and things like that. So there is some scope. It's mainly around infrastructure rebuilds, and we would ask, generally because these are higher or larger amounts, we are happy to pre-qualify. So if someone has, you know, I had a you know, 2-bay shed, flooding inundated it, it's no longer structurally sound, we're going to build it back with these materials, these are the costs. We're able to actually pre-approve that so that the risk is taken away from doing these works and then not getting reimbursed for them. The major thing to call out is that it's not for expansion projects. So if you, and I'm just using the shed example because it's an easy one, if you had a 2-bay shed but you wanted to build back a 6-bay shed, that's okay, but we would only be able to cover the replacement costs for the equivalent 2-bay shed. So it's really about this communication with us and providing what is the recovery plan, why would you want to build back with different materials, or why you'd like to move an asset maybe away from the flood zone, or you know, put in extra drainage or causeways with roads. It's really about communicating with us, and then we can go, yes, that broadly fits under the guidelines, and to proceed with the works.
Thank you.
Future resilience doesn't apply to the Feb-March 21 event, unfortunately. That is like-for-like replacement.
Thanks, Justine. Paula, I did see you had your hand raised. Has your question been answered? Yes, found guidelines on website. Okay, and also in the chat box, Zita has put a link to the DPI Dairy newsletter, which has the link within there to the one-pager that Justine and her team pulled together around some of the grant processes and requirements as well. So back to the rural assistance team to continue on, and then we'll take more questions.
And then open for any questions.
Yeah, so I just thought I'd touch on a few things that we see in the payment space. I'm sure you'll have plenty of questions, so I'll keep it brief. But the things we see are fencing, fodder, adjustment, earthworks, and how we look at them. And we've had a bit of feedback lately that we ask way too many questions and what do we want to know this for? But we're really just trying to understand what the business is doing, the recovery of your business, and yeah, what is your normal course of business and how we can get you all back on track, really. So they're the main things we see in my daily work, but there's so many things we can also help with. The progressive payments, we know some people have been impacted 3 times. So, you know, we pay the same invoice 5 times and they're progressively paying $1,000, and we just give them $1,000 back every time they make those payments. So that's been really helpful. We also, as Justine mentioned, we can do pre-approval on those bigger expenses. So that's also helpful. But yeah, we've got an email and we're happy to, yeah, provide any feedback. But yeah, basically we really just want to understand what we can do to help you. And yeah, lots of questions, but really just trying to understand you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Erin.
No worries.
I've got a couple more if we want to keep going.
Yeah, we
Just from
might.
people raising, see what everyone else asks first.
Yeah. Andrew, sorry, Jane, I've got your message. That's okay. Yes, this is being recorded. So you have just missed their presentation, and we are now opening it up to questions. I will just kick off with a couple. I've got a question from a farmer who can't actually make the session this morning. And his question, well, there were two questions actually. One was around the purchase of fodder, and can you be purchasing fodder for up to 3 months after the event and claiming that? And the second question was around the use of fertiliser to restore soil nutrient levels. Is that allowable? He couldn't find that in the guidelines.
Yeah, well, they both actually do fit within the guidelines, Sheena, and we've tried to kind of give ourselves a bit of a benchmark of 6 months from the declaration date on fodder. So if there's been 3 events, the February, March one would have a 6 months date. However, when I say that, we kind of also had a guide, for the adjustment as well of 6 months. But all we want to know after the 6 months really is just as back to the same thing I said, we just want to understand why you're still buying feed. And you might not be able to get on your property, you might not be able to, there's so many answers, honestly. But we've sort of set our own little guideline of that 6 month kind of period, but we're just trying to understand why you're still buying fodder.
Okay.
And second question, yes, lime and fertiliser definitely fits. If the third is probably the February 22 floods. If you are trying to claim lime and fertiliser in that, we'd often look back. We'd probably paid for it in the previous ones, to be honest. But because normally for the February 21, we actually look at your previous input costs. We just want to understand if you've already had it and laid it on your crops. So we just, back to truly trying to understand. But yes, it definitely fits. And just, we've had agronomy reports. Lots of people have had catchment there to check that they need to plant this or do this. And so we as much evidence as you can provide really helps us understand what you need.
Fantastic. Thanks, Erin.
I might just say there too that one of the main reasons is farmers are using their own silage provisions early and may come into purchasing later as the season continues to be wet. And I have found, to RAA's credit, that anyone who told you the story had good feedback that people have still been able to access their hay, and just by telling what's actually happening on their farm.
We're really
I think you guys have been very approachable in that fashion. So it may not allow them to access the transport subsidy without drawing on that in 3 months. That's a bit of a concern for farmers, that they try and limp through, if you like, with their own silage, and then find they can't, and they may miss out on that transport subsidy. It's just to note.
Just on that, we could also include the transport under the special disaster grant, but yes, you wouldn't be able to access the additional natural disaster transport subsidy if you weren't accessing it in that first month.
Yes, I think that's important for anyone listening, that the first transport subsidy to be drawn in 3 months. I was talking to someone the other day, and they seemed to think that they claimed the transport subsidy and got half their freight costs back, and they claimed the unpaid 50% in the disaster grant. And normally, historically, you could either just take one advantage of one of the offerings. Is that actually available now?
Yes, I believe it is true. Yes, we definitely are covering the transport of that on the other, which I know does sound crazy, but it's definitely happening, and that's what we can do. Yep.
Yeah, so that's an interesting
thing. We're not out of pocket at all.
Yeah. So I think anyone on the line where you're claiming half the freight under the subsidy, you can claim the other half of the freight included in your fodder bill under the 75, if that's what you wish to do with your fund. So that's good. That's a good hand. Planting cycle in the supply chain grant, it had a thing saying one planting cycle, and the old salvaging crops. I had someone who had a corn crop in. For silage, they're now not able to get on to harvest that. So that corn's now gone to head. They need to hire a different piece of equipment to actually harvest the grain, so salvaging something out of the crop that wasn't their internal original intention. So could I just ask how that would be looked at, and also what is one planting cycle? Given we're having a few floods after the other, are we able to claim those planting cycles in each flood because we're getting washed out each time?
So with the supply chain support grant, it was in relation to the February-March 21 event.
Yep.
So technically, expenses claimed under that have to be related to that event. Because there's been subsequent events, we understand that has changed and people have had to sort of be a bit more flexible in their recovery plan, but we have to always think about how does it relate back to that first event. So if they can't necessarily get on there because of subsequent rain from other events or flooding, that can't or won't necessarily be able to be a cost claimed under that supply chain. But I think, again, probably best to talk to us on a case-by-case basis, because we'll work through, you know, is it the supply chain it can be covered under, or have they been declared under multiple events? And maybe we can cover some of those costs under subsequent primary producer grants. But with all of these events, we have to think back to what was the damage and the impact from the specific event at the time.
Yep. Yeah. Now, what about the salvaging one? Are they able to, because they've got their own equipment to harvest a corn silage crop, but they haven't got their own equipment to now salvage the corn out of the cob, if you like, instead of taking the whole plant and chopping that up for the cow in silage? It's now gone brown, the stalk's gone brown, it's got no nutritional value, and the corn head is obviously got seeds in it, and they're trying to harvest for that. Would that be an example of salvaging?
I believe it would potentially be under the 2022 grant. So it would be about that salvaging and restoring fields, paddocks to the pre-event condition. So I think, yes, generally it would be, but we might, if there's a specific case, we might have a chat about it and just understand the circumstances to make sure that we're providing the correct advice. But broadly, yes, I think it could be.
In the hiring supply of someone. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Feel free to ask questions, everyone else, either speak up or raise your hand or type the questions into the chat. This is your golden opportunity. Obviously not specific questions, but generic questions as we've sort of had. Ian, yes, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Sheena. I see a lot of good here, and that is, and a lot of bad in the flood and the damage, of course, but as the support is evolving. But some of these things couldn't be read so clearly in the first stages, and farmers asked me, and I talked to the rural councillor, as the first explanations of what might fit. And that worries me a bit, but it's good that things are evolving and support's evolving and there's better understanding of all the problems. But I think there's perhaps not a lot of clarity from some of the people in their first inquiries as to what might be truly eligible now. I'm pleased with the support from the people on the panel, with their desire to get an understanding and their desire to get support out there to farmers.
Thank you. Yeah, and look, I think we acknowledge that with every new event that it just gets more complex, because there's a lot of people that have been impacted 2 or 3 times and might have, 2, 3, 4 different types of assistance. So, that's where we're really encouraging pick up the phone, and if there's any sort of grey areas, to try and talk through with us. As best we can, we'll try and direct people to the right assistance and where to put invoices or expenses to make sure they're being linked back to the right event, but also maximising the grant and assistance that is available.
Thanks, Justine. Thanks, Ian. Any other comments or questions, Ian?
That's it, Chair, at this stage.
Okay, thank you. There is a question in the chat box from Gayleen. She's just asking, how long does it take from submission of invoices to receive payment?
Oh, I'd like to say tomorrow, but let's be honest, 3 different programs across multiple events, it's actually probably about 10 days at the moment. We've got people working overtime, like it's a big thing, yeah.
And I think the big call out, as much information as you can give us upfront when you're submitting those invoices, it means that hopefully we can sort of process more without needing to collect.
Yeah,
or
that's right.
get a better
Absolutely, because the amount of new ones that come in, that's probably how many are waiting. We also have just waiting on some evidence or just some type of, clarity on what you're trying to do. So, yeah, the more info up front is very helpful. And obviously you need proof of payment, and we're still seeing people send invoices in, and I just keep sending them, and they still haven't validated, say, the first 15,000. So people are finding that a challenge. So so still about 10 days, unfortunately, but yes.
Okay, and also just to clarify, Erin, that proof of payment is what?
Yes, just to prove that you've paid the invoice. It can come in various forms. We've got internet banking, snapshots, bank statements, emails from suppliers, FPOS receipts.
Okay. Norco, like statements of accounts.
Oh, yes.
Is a common one we
that
see.
Is very common, the
dairy.
Norco one. But yeah, just something to evidence, Sheena, that you've actually paid the bill, really.
Okay, beautiful.
And we've had a lot of requests, actually, if we could just pay the supplier. So I'm just put that out there. That is not an option. Yeah.
And look, the main reason we can't pay them directly is GST. Obviously, if we're paying them directly, there's a GST, or generally GST, that would be applicable. And yeah, we're paying a third party as opposed to it being paid itself. It just isn't something that we can facilitate.
Okay, great. Thank you. Now, there's 2 questions in the chat, one from Lynn and one from Jane. And sorry, Lynn, I'll just go to Jane's first because it's related to the invoices. She says, should we save all invoices and send later, or do we send them as we receive and pay them?
Up to you. I'm happy to receive them and pay them like as you get them. It depends. Everyone's got different cash flow requirements. We get some where they're sending their whole year, 20, and others are just one at a time. So we're happy for either of that. And yeah, and when we do pick up a thing like we've got a big queue, but when we pick them up, we actually search your whole. We search for you, so we often bring multiple together, which I know sounds confusing, but yeah, we put them all together. So, yeah.
Okay, beautiful. And back to Lynn's question. We know there's been multiple rain events in many different regions. When you say February, March event, does that affect Lismore and Nowra areas? And I guess that's an LGA response, but I'll let you respond to that.
I'm certain Lismore was declared under February 21. Yes, Lismore was February 2021 as well as February 2022. I don't believe Nowra was part of the 2021 event. But there is, on the RAA website, there is a link to all the declarations. We are looking at updating the website as well to potentially search by LGAs so that you can see exactly what assistance you'd be available for. So hopefully that will be coming soon.
And you can see we even have to refer, there are so many dates and LGAs in our head that it is like mind-boggling. So, yeah.
It's unfortunate, but yeah, it is a long, and I think this current year's event, there's over 50 LGAs. I can't remember what the number's up to now, but anyway, thank you for that. Andrew, you have another question?
Yeah, thanks, Sheena. Just on that payment, I love how the supply chain grant has 25 grand up front for people to do the work, which has been a bit of a bugbear with the 75s after the first 15. If someone, and we're really looking at people that have been smashed and they get a milk check and they've got a grain bill they have to pay, and little surplus to pay these, so it's about the speed of recovery. If someone was going to juggle, so I got my milk check in, I'll whack a flood payment in, and try and get it in. Is there some way that they could touch base and maybe get a little bit of priority in that case where their cash flows are really strapped, that they're basically using their milk check and they've got to have that back to pay their grain bill that they normally would, or the grain will get cut off. So is there an avenue for someone who feels their financial constraints are quite difficult? Could they maybe see if they could get their invoice paid within a few days if submitted with all the correct information and
yeah, I agree on supply chain, but that happens with the invoices in general in the normal invoicing team. Yeah, definitely, we've got escalation points, and yeah, same thing. We just really want to understand what's going on, and if there's something needs escalating, yeah, for sure. Yep.
Just they can either reach out to our 1-800 number and request to talk to the payments team, or we also have an email inbox. So we can provide the details for that and just essentially saying exceptional circumstances around why that would need to be escalated, but definitely we can do that.
Don't tell everyone, Andrew. No,
no. But there are people who, some people have got money and some haven't.
Oh, I know.
And it's quite hard. One other thing, because we didn't know about keeping a diary for in-kind work until announcement in September of the supply chain grant, and people are digging back, what sort of things you're really looking for in that worksheet? And when you're asking for 25 grand that they're putting every time you do 20, is someone able to submit the worksheet, get that approved, and if that was for 100,000 or whatever amount plus some invoices, does that mean that would then prove their input? Would you be accepting, when do you accept their worksheet, I suppose, and is that able to be done in one go so that they're really saying, well, here's my invoices, here's my worksheet, there's my 100 grand. Is that box ticked?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we had the conversation about the funding deed, we've had some situations where they're sending that in-kind worksheet through straight away just to check that everything's okay, and that's pretty much a pre-approval for the in-kind or the co-contribution. So I do know we have a fair few applicants that their co-contribution is max to the 100,000. So now we're just waiting on those invoices. So that's totally okay if they're wanting to do that, before they've received their first milestone or throughout that process. We can do their contribution, which would carry over to all milestones, so they can reach that 100,000. And either that be invoices or direct cash, it doesn't matter. We can still obviously note that down, and it'll just be the invoices that they're needing to submit and proof of payment. Yeah.
Yep. Thank you. And Justine, I just want to think about that gravel one where they're supplying their own as an in-kind, because some might be putting 15, 20 grand worth of gravel into the occasion. They're trying to get up to that in-kind. So can you maybe have a think about that as an in-kind contribution, or is it set in cement that it couldn't be?
Look, at this point in the program, I'm not confident that we can potentially get it changed. I am aware of some potential upcoming programs, so we could potentially look at getting that changed for future programs, but let us take it away and see what we can do.
Yeah, I don't think it'd be many people, but it might be on a case-by-case basis, perhaps.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, so a couple of things happening in the chat. If you go back down to your chat box, everyone, Zita has put a link in there which takes you to the RAA website where you can see the grants, and I'm assuming, is that the one, Zita, you should be able to find from there anyway, if you are in a declared LGA with each of those grants.
Yeah, there's like a tab you can click on with each
I'm just listening
grant.
to the
Someone's on.
Hey Donna, you need to mute yourself. Thanks, Donna.
Yeah, and if you click on each of the different grants, you can actually see the LGAs under each one. So
fantastic. And can you explain, this is John Usher, can you explain the difference between the 2021 and 2022 events? Applicable claim items, especially around the more resilient versus like for like. Example, laneways damaged again in 2022. Does that make sense to you, Justine, or would you like John to?
I'm assuming that's around that future resilience clause. So for the March 2021 event, Feb March 2021 event, within the guidelines, the intent was to replace things like for like. So using same materials, same locations, build back with exactly what was there. However, based on feedback and obviously the number of events we've had this year, which has been somewhat unprecedented, there has been an acknowledge that, you know, there may be items that we've had to rebuild a second time or replace a second time. So it would make a lot more sense to build them back with stronger materials, or, you know, moving cattle yards or a fence line slightly, or, you know, some of those roadworks and earthworks, and actually do a better job that will make them more resilient, in the hope that we don't have to replace them multiple times. So if something was just damaged in February or March 21 and hasn't had any subsequent damage, that would have to be built back or replaced like for like. However, if you're using the supply chain, there is some ability for that future resilience. If it subsequently, you hadn't done the works yet and additional damage had occurred in February 2022, there would be the consideration to build back with more resilient materials or consider moving. So I know it's a little bit confusing, and I think if there's any questions or particular circumstances, we're happy to chat through them on a case-by-case basis, because I know it can be a little confusing to work out exactly where those works should be undertaken.
Is that answering your question, John?
Yes, I believe that will, but it sounds like I will have a chat with them. I think that's the best.
All right, beautiful. Now, I also have another question around claiming the transport subsidy. So you mentioned earlier that they've got the ability to claim that in the transport subsidy itself in that first 3 months, and then you can claim the second half through using the grant. The question is, how do you claim that if you can only use an invoice once?
So the technicality is, so yes, it's the same invoice, but we haven't paid for a portion of it. So when submitting that invoice, we acknowledge it's the same invoice you'll supply, but you would just note 50% paid under the transport subsidy, and I want to be paid the balance of the 50%. So it's really about not paying for an item twice, more so than submitting the same invoice twice.
Great. Thanks, Justine. Any more questions? We do have a comment from Jane Sherborne just saying, thank you for understanding and being proactive, being future focused in the Build Back Better. Yes, which is a very good point, Jane. Any other questions, either in the chat or feel free to just unmute yourself and ask a question?
I've just got one more, Justine, and then I'm finished. The supply chain grant, I noticed in some announcements recently from government, though, there's been some money ear tagged for a similar program off the back of this flood. So we're sort of saying to people, try and keep a record of times so that in-kind worksheet's going to be easy to complete rather than looking back in the rear vision mirror we did last year. So is that the case, and do you see much difference in what that might look like, and when might that become available so people can plan their farm expenditure for flood recovery, because there's a slight difference in what you can use it for, a la fodder? And also in where people are bumping up in their grain, is it sufficient they might do a spreadsheet or a table where they say, well, because of the pasture, we're bumping up our grain to cattle at 2 kilos a head, and it's going to be for so many days, and then claim that extra grain. So one is around the extra grain calculation many farmers are putting into their cows because of the pasture, and the second one's about the future supply chain and what that might look like when we might get to find out.
Yeah, definitely. So they are scoping that at the moment. My understanding is it will potentially be a similar program. There may be some different industries. So basically, the last time they did the supply chain support grant, they met with a lot of industry experts to try and assess what industries were damaged the greatest and what industries really needed additional help over and above the primary producer grant. So I imagine that same process is happening at the moment. I know one of the feedback, or some of the feedback around the first supply chain support grant, was that it was too long after the event, so people didn't have that time to plan, and if they went ahead and spent, they were, there was some penalties for doing that almost. So I don't have a time frame, but I do know they're aware of potentially bringing that close, like not having it so long after the event. But it's actually regional New South Wales who are doing that scoping work at the moment. So hopefully we'll have some more details in the coming month about what that program looks like.
And just on that grain question?
Yes. So is that in terms of people buying more grain in because they're feeding more regularly? Yep. So again, if you can just explain, or when an applicant's submitting that information, this is the reason I need more than potentially I've previously fed or used, it should be covered under the grant. It's really about that explanation piece so that we know why, if we're looking back at financials or historical invoices, why it might be different to what they've done in the past, but that would make sense.
Yes, definitely. Yep.
Yep. Thank you. Thanks for your candour and answering today. It's been great. Thank you.
No problem.
Lovely. Thanks, Andrew. Now, look, we still have 7 minutes. So if you do have questions, please feel free to ask them. I will just say that if you are looking for support in filling in grant applications, there's a couple of avenues. There's obviously the rural financial counsellors in your area that can help you with grant applications. Up north, Andrew, you might be able to correct me if I'm wrong, but Subtropical Dairy are giving access or providing Andrew to help farmers with one-on-one support. Is that still the case, Andrew?
Not 100% sure. I've had two stints up Lismore Way and done a few on the way home. I haven't been engaged for a third one yet, so I suppose it depends on what demand and the funding, of course, to cover that from DA.
Yes.
So that might be something to talk to your DA local representative, from Alana from Subtropical, and see whether there's going to be funding still available for a subsequent trip up there. But yeah, I've had probably 2 weeks up there off and on over a couple of weeks and got around a fair few farmers. So
fantastic.
Yeah.
Yep. So yep, the dairy industry is very good at supporting farmers in this space. So if you think, if you're struggling to get in touch with rural financial counsellors and you'd like access to Andrew, I would email Subtropical Dairy, and yes, probably Alana Connolly, the extension officer up there in the first instance, and express some interest in that potentially. Have we got any other questions? Ian, yes, over to you, Ian.
I'd like to make a comment. Yeah, I talked to a lot of farmers around here up and down the coast over the last wet weather events, and a lot of them don't feel they might have fitted into the programs, or they didn't think, we had a bad enough flood and so on. Clearly that's changed now, where virtually everyone fits, everyone's eligible. I'd like to be assured that all farmers, and Andrew's talks of going up the north coast, and my words now seeing some farmers, I wish there was a way we could get all farmers to take advantage of the support that's there. But I was talking to a farmer the other day that had silage all over his paddocks and in the fences and everything. He didn't feel like he knew how to go about it. So we can't do much more, but the sense is farmers should be contacted, find a way to get them all in the net to seek the support of this funding.
Yeah, it is a challenge. I think, you know, and obviously there's various ways that these opportunities are communicated to farmers. And I know, you know, different people access information in different ways, but it's certainly pushed out through the regional development programs around the state, so Dairy New South Wales or Subtropical, via newsletters or Facebook, whatever, you know, happens to be your mode of engagement, and through our DPI, similar newsletters and Facebook pages. I know in the, you know, in the immediacy of the devastation that particularly, so last time around on the mid-north coast, the Dairy New South Wales had a concerted effort to contact all farmers on the database and understand their situation and potentially signpost people towards assistance. And I understand that's happened in the subtropical region this time because of the severity. So it's not, and it is a very time-consuming exercise. And I, you know, even in those conversations which I have been involved with, you get the same challenge, Ian. You get people saying, "Oh yes, but there's someone worse off," and it's like, well, no, actually, this is for you. So, and sometimes it probably is that conversation. So I guess it's up to all of us to facilitate that conversation. And you know, I think if you're speaking with a fellow farmer or as a consultant with farmers, please, yeah, encourage them to reach out and apply, whether it's through phone, email, or whatever. Even, you know, if it's Zeta or myself or Subtropical, Dairy New South Wales, whoever, we can always steer you in the right direction.
Yeah, thanks, Sheena.
And I think on the back of what Ian's saying, I think because we had floods last year, we saw a lot of brown water up flooding, and of course it's storm and flood grants basically. And whilst we might not have water laying on the paddock, we're still getting the washouts, we're still getting the pasture failures. You know, we're still going to have a quite a big fodder reserve. So just because people haven't necessarily seen brown water right up to the house like we may have last year in the mid coast and certainly similar up in the north coast this year, there are other damages from the storm and flood, particularly if we can't get on paddocks and plant them out. So you know, and there's water still, everything's waterlogged. So yeah, I just think we've got to think outside what we perceive as flood up to our ankles at the house. Is different impacts on us this time around.
Yeah, can I make a comment?
Sure.
Sheena? Yeah, that's very true, Andrew. This is the worst year for 30 years. 30 years ago, herds might have been a quarter of the size, I would say. And now it's a need of laneways and access, and everything's different now. And that means, I would say, we've got a stronger dairy industry of the surviving farmers, yeah, producing a lot of milk and bigger businesses. But it's certainly not a matter if you get water over your farm 2 foot deep to say that's, if you don't get that, you're not in a crisis point. The other thing in this area as well, the test is yet to come because all the autumn sowing should have been in for early winter feed and spring feed. None of that's in at the moment. So we could see the fodder bills increasing, even though we'd say, well, the flood times have passed because, you know, dairying isn't a matter of available feed. So there's still some tough times to come in recovery.
Yep, well and truly, Ian. Well said. Okay, look, we are pretty much at 12 o'clock, unless we've got
Sheena, just a
further
quick question from Jane there. Just asking, is the consultant's report useful to explain the farm situation and needs? I guess Justine might be better to comment, but I think yes, in what I've heard, that consultants' reports are really useful to attach to your application to quantify the damage. Is that right, Justine?
Definitely. Anything like that that you can attach that talks to the damage and potential recovery plans as well really helps both in the assessment process, but also when you're getting to that point of submitting invoices. So absolutely.
Yeah, and we've had different ones. We've had some from like a catchment, you know, a river catchment saying, yes, we need to do this amount of work. We've had veterinary reports, agronomists, like they're all varying, you know, different levels of, but all providing that insight into what's happened and what needs to be recovered, really. So
excellent, thank you. Yeah, every situation is different, so yeah, anything helps. Right, well, thank you everyone for participating. Thank you for asking your questions, and most importantly, thank you very much, Justine, Felicity, Karina, and Erin, for your time and your generosity in helping the industry get through this with their applications. So thank you everyone. We will distribute the recording once it has been extracted, and make sure you get in touch with Justine and her team if you have specific questions. That is it. So thank you very much.